So welcome to Elevating Truth, laying the groundwork for clinical medical cannabis research. I am Ryan Basen. I'm a staff writer with MedPage Today. We're a medical news site, national site based out of New York, and we do quite a bit of reporting, or I should say we have over the last few years, of medical cannabis as well as cannabis policy and really anything that ties into that. So I'm really happy to be here. We have three really excellent guests to talk about this today. So what I want to do first is just introduce them, and then I'm going to ask them some questions, and they're each going to speak for a bit, and then we will obviously open it up to all of you guys who are watching to ask any questions that you would have towards the end of this panel. I think this is kind of how a lot of panels have gone today, so it should be fairly standard. So without further ado, let me go ahead and start introducing our panelists today. We have Abbey Roudebush, who is the Senior Manager of Government Relations and Advocacy for the Epilepsy Foundation. Abbey received her JD from the Albany Law School of Union University. We also have with us Dr. Brandi Cross, who is the founder and principal investigator with the Pot Lab, which was founded 10 years ago. When many people were thinking about how hemp could change the world, and now the Pot Lab presents a multitude of organic and vegan products made with the best plant oils and extracts from around the world via signature tinctures and balms for medical use. Dr. Cross received her PhD in biochemistry and cellular and molecular biology from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore, and also got her MS and BA from California State in Northridge. Finally, we have Cherissa Jackson, who is a registered nurse and a retired Air Force combat clinician. And Cherissa now leads AM Vets HEAL program, HEAL. She has 23 years of active duty service, was deployed 3 times during Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom as a battlefield clinician. She's also the author of At Peace, Not in Pieces, which was a best-selling memoir, outlines the principles of coping with the challenges of PTSD as a combat veteran and nurse. She was named as the chief medical officer and again leads AM Vets HEAL program, which strives to confront the risk factors that lead to crisis and veteran suicide. So I hope I got all that right. And without further ado, I want to turn it over. So Abbey, why don't we start with you? Let's talk a little bit just about some of the challenges with really delving into research, particularly when it comes to access, for patients to be able to participate in the research and to have, to be able to benefit from the research in any way.
Right. When we're talking about cannabis research, we're talking about a lot of problems and considerations, especially for patients and individuals who are already using cannabis and CBD products that are out there. As far as access, one thing that is very important to the Epilepsy Foundation in particular is that when we talk about research, we need to make sure that people understand that we can't take a step back. With research, we can only take a step forward. And so we can't pull all of these products off the market and say, we'll allow research, but now you have to do research before you're allowed to sell anything that's already on the market, because there are people who rely on that. To give you an example, there are 3.4 million Americans living with epilepsy and seizures, and of those 3.4 million Americans, about a third, so over 1 million, live with uncontrolled seizures and epilepsy. And that includes with all existing medications, treatment options, surgeries, special diets. And so for these people in particular, a lot of them do turn to medical cannabis or CBD in particular, and some of them do find success. So it's important that we realize that by taking that away from them, even though we don't have the research that we so badly need right now, we can't take it away from them in order to get the research and then go back to where we are right now. We need to meet individuals where they are at and understand that if somebody is using a product, if a physician believes that that product would be helpful to an individual, they need to maintain access to that while we do research into this, and we need to evolve. And I understand that it's not for a lot of people, it's not the ideal or typical way. Usually you would like to have the research first before these things happen. But because the federal government has lagged behind for decades too long, we just can't take any steps back. So we need to make sure that when we're doing research, access to these products is allowed as well. And then, quickly when we talk about people participating in these studies, it's also important, if there's anything going through the FDA process in particular, that there are compassionate care uses allowed for that as well. But importantly, also the FDA should not or cannot be the only place that does this kind of research as well, because there's plenty of research that we need that isn't through a drug approval process or specific to an approval.
And are there any, you bring up the FDA and that process, is there anything that comes to mind, that would be better off not going through the FDA process, at least right now, and particularly, the challenges that we have faced during the pandemic?
Right. Well, I mean, there are a lot of challenges with going through the FDA approval process, including monetary challenges. It's very, very expensive. It takes a very long time. And also sometimes we're looking for answers that don't necessarily need to go through a drug approval process. So we're looking at, mechanisms of action just in general and not specific to any kind of formulation, or wanting to know just generally, how does this impact with or impact other pharmaceuticals or anything like that. That wouldn't be specific to one product, but is specific to like epilepsy as a whole, for instance. And so that's why the FDA can't be the only pathway, because we need answers that wouldn't be specific to one formulation.
Okay. I want to turn now, let's go to Cherissa Jackson. And I wanted to talk to you, given your experience, about some of the challenges that you see within the space concerning veterans and research, particularly related to PTSD and, and another, major topic, opioid addiction, which obviously, is not just limited to veterans, but has become a major issue within the veteran community.
Absolutely. I think it's important that we all are aware that as we are here in this virtual event, there's a veteran that is taking his life. We know the stats say that 22 veterans take their life each day. And so for me, my advocacy work is all about doing the research so we can allow cannabis to be an option for veterans who are taking their lives, who are on all of these opioids for back pain and all of these chronic conditions that they have gotten from the military. So it's important that veterans have these options. It's important that the research will allow us to help the VA make that assessment and encourage veterans to go this route so that veterans can use this medicine so we can save their lives. And so everything that I'm doing out here in the community, everything that I'm doing out here is to promote awareness, to ensure veterans know what their options are. And at the end of the day, what's been working is not working anymore. And we're losing veterans every single day. So why not choose this as a viable option and let the veterans make that decision? And I think at this point and stage in our lives, in the community, in Congress, in the world, given we just came out of COVID, it's important that we use this plant in the right way. And the best way to do that is to have advocates, as well as to have doctors and clinicians and people in the industry that can bring this awareness to the veteran community. So I feel right now we're in a very great place to incorporate the conversations about veterans so that we can provide this option to them and save their lives.
Okay. And, you mentioned clinicians. I'm wondering, is there anything more or different than that they can do? Because certainly clinician buy-in to the medical cannabis space in general has been maybe not as fast as many people would want it to have been, to put it mildly. So what else could they do, if they're listening this year and in the near future to really address this issue?
Well, I've been a nurse since 2003, and then I retired in 2013. And one of the things that I've always wanted to do is to impact the lives of not only veterans, but the community as a whole. And knowing that cannabis is a conversation that the community is having, I think clinicians should really stake into that and say, what can I do to help my community? What can I do to help children? What can I do to help veterans? And I think if clinicians look outside their box of being at bedside and look outside their box of just passing pills and say, this is a viable option, I think they can see this as the potential that it has, which is to impact the lives of the community and impact the lives of veterans and children.
Okay. And then I'll put you on the spot here. See if you know, are there any resources in particular that you're aware of that are good for clinicians to check out that could help here too?
Well, I'm a little biased to some, but I'm sure Asa will put some great resources there in the chat box. But yeah, it's just a simple Google. That's what I did back last year during COVID. I Googled, clinicians in cannabis, and there was a slew of opportunities, a slew of different certification programs that you can go through. And I had to find the one that was a fit for me. And I think there's so many out there. It'll be, not in my best interest to just list off a couple because I don't know what's a fit for most clinicians. My background is different than most. I had ER, ICU, critical care. So all of those credentials made me a different fit for a different program. So I'm sure Asa will put some resources there in the chat for people.
Okay. Want to pivot now to Brandi Cross. And so Brandi, wanted to ask you a little bit about the research itself and kind of some of the minutiae, particularly when it comes to data collection,
Sure.
and that of course lends itself to data analysis and how to really create a good clinical research program when it comes to medical cannabis at large, and if there's anything in particular that you want to discuss too.
Sure. So where do you start, right? So my background is in biomedical research. So the fancy PhD with like 3 different things on it just means that I study different aspects of science, math, and computer science in the form of biomedical research, which is usually translational. So now I'm doing more translational, which means it's like from the lab bench to bedside rather than just keeping it on the lab bench. I think there's 5 things that you want to keep in mind beyond getting your PhD or getting a nursing degree or getting, actual STEM oriented degree, because I think that's where the data lacks a lot. We don't have a lot of PhDs in STEM who want to even engage. I was involved with organizing the March for Science, and my own science people were like, cannabis, that's a joke, and la la la. And it's like, did you read the papers? Like, there's so many papers out there with scientific data, but it's kind of twisted. And as a molecular biologist, someone that's good at organic chemistry and these different cell types and like the vocab, I can pull at least 25,000 articles on cannabis. We've studied cannabis. The research is there in basic science and in animal studies and even some clinical studies, which don't get the light that they should because of the laws we have, which are very, very, very old. We used to test different things by burning them and then analyzing the smoke. And that's called gas chromatography. And we don't even use that anymore. We use a different kind of analysis that uses different kinds of chemicals to basically analyze things at room temperature. And what we found is that THCA is the dominant molecule, which is different than THC. As an organic chemistry person, that's my thing, I can tell you THCA and THC are 2 different molecules. It's not an analog. It's, you could loosely call it a precursor, but it's what the plant predominantly makes. In any live plant, there's less than 0.1% THC. So when you're developing a clinical program, I myself am politically an anarchist, and most people are like, oh, you believe in chaos? No. I think there's 5 things that anarchists believe in, such as self-discipline, meaning I'm keeping myself accountable, that really help this whole process. The first thing is being boldly honest. If something doesn't work, don't argue with people. Don't tell people, well, it didn't work for you because you didn't do this and that. And there's a lot of products out there where people aren't just being boldly honest and saying it won't work for everyone. It's not magical. You know, our collective research group has 30% rare genetic disease, and I don't think that's a fluke. I think that's who we're helping. So you have to kind of be, I guess that's further down, you got to be humble. You got to be honest with yourself and with other people, because this is seen as experimental to the public, even though in science we have lots and lots of data. The other thing is being meticulous, and this is where I think getting a PhD in research science is really, really important for the kids out there thinking of how can I get into cannabis? We need more scientists. Meticulous, extremely meticulous people can collect lots of data and then analyze it 1,000 different ways. From collecting 5 years of data, I could write probably 8 different scientific papers on different groups of people who've tried this, and either it not worked or it worked really well, and what the differences between the groups are. So being meticulous, being brutally disciplined, that's my other thing, brutal discipline. Like, you can't just party at the cannabis parties and like expect your career to go great. I mean, that's going to be great in the short term to make relationships, but in the long term, you're going to have to keep yourself analyzing that data so that we can pass it on to people like Cherissa and Abbey, and they can actually have this like mathematical equation type data, what we call hard data. The other thing is you must be immensely intellectual, meaning you can't just study science. You need to study sociology. You need to study politics. You need to study a lot of things to actually make it in the cannabis industry, because there's a ton of wheels turning. It's like an 8-wheel cart. You're like always filing your taxes, or you're doing this or that, applying for grants, and you've got to understand different processes and how they work. And finally, you have to be really creative. We collect data over social media. We use social media to amplify and recruit people to our research program. We use it to give out discounts. We use it for outreach, obviously. But also, all of our things are online. So when COVID hit, it was like, we're still collecting data. You can still hit the link. You can still go to our website. You can still have this product. It didn't really affect us because we were creative to begin with, and working outside of the box and meshing those 5 things together in order to stay stable, even in the worst of times. And in the worst of times, we were able to actually give back to our community and offer discounts and things like that, because we knew people were struggling with low overhead. Again, being creative in how you finance things. A lot of people are quick to take investor money, not knowing that the R&D department is going to be nil in their company. So if you do have a company, build out your R&D department. I'm here, contact me. Like, I've set up R&D in lots and lots of different corporate labs. It's not as hard or as expensive as people think, but it is expensive. Science is expensive. Like, the tools we use to get the answers we need are expensive. And so since we self-finance, we also have a membership product program with our research products, but it's like you have to actually give us feedback. So some people are like, I don't want to do that, but some people are really into giving us feedback, and that data can be used to argue different laws and really amplify the voices of patients, because that's what we want. We want to know what the patients are feeling. We want to know from them, because if it's just us telling them they're going to feel better, it's not going to work. You know, there's still going to be people it doesn't work for. So getting that data and those actual numbers and knowing, you know, statistically how many people we can help is so valuable.
Okay, thank you. We are like perfect timing now to open up to Q&A, so I'll try to segue right into that. I have a few questions here, and so first question, I'll just open it up to any of the 3 of you who wants to field this, but what are some negative effects of adult use legalization on medical cannabis? And say Mississippi has passed medical cannabis, which is still in the process of starting up and should begin July for licensing. Really, what are some of the negative effects of adult use legalization on medical cannabis?
Here in LA, I'll tell you what happened. It's the shift of focus is the problem for me. So instead of keeping intact our patient collectives, they changed the laws because they wanted to legalize recreational cannabis. So here come the investors and all the money and all the fun. And then they like 20 different delivery things. They almost do a song and dance at your doorstep. Like, it's all entertainment. And so the medical cannabis providers and patients got nudged right out of the city council. And I was there because I stood up and said something. We got pushed aside for profit. And that's a huge problem, because I'm a medical cannabis patient. I smoke weed. I don't just use, acids and THCA, but I do smoke weed. And to be pushed out that way, it's so rude. But yeah, they pushed us out of the way, and now it's all fun and games in Hollywood, and like, it's just fun and games. You can't even order from a reputable place anymore. The delivery services that were compassionate are now, either changed to entertainment purposes because that's an easy way to get out of liability, or they're just not focused on medicine. If you ask them what's, good for a headache, they don't even know anymore, because they did was hire cute kids to work at the thing and flirt with people. And, it became a big party when they were saying before it was a big party. And I'm confused. But it's a lack of respect for me that I find really annoying.
And I would like to piggyback off what Dr. Cross said. I think even in the veteran community, my concern would be legalization. We have to stay focused. Because for veterans, I want them to stay within the medical cannabis area, only because we can at least say, is for medicinal purposes, and that they're getting it from a dispensary instead of getting it from a place that we can't vouch for. Let's keep it real. You can either go the route where you can go inside of a store, get some bona fide quality product, or you can just get some where you can't really, verify or certify that is bona fide, right? And so for me, the important thing is making sure veterans get that good quality medication. And so in order to do that, even with legalization, we have to make sure that the veterans stay in the medicinal cannabis area. We have to make sure they stay within the program, because that's our assurance that they're getting the quality products that they deserve.
And quickly to add on to that as well, when we're talking about medical cannabis, obviously we're talking about a lot of things, and not just something like a headache where if maybe, Tylenol doesn't work and you don't want to take something stronger, cannabis can. We're also talking about life-threatening diseases and chronic conditions like epilepsy. And so one thing that's important is these adult use legalization programs, anyone can walk in, but with the medical dispensaries, you have to keep your physician involved. And there is a lot of misinformation out there, or misconceptions that, medicine doesn't work for me, but cannabis or CBD will. And especially for people living with epilepsy, cannabis and CBD is just like every other medication. It's not one size fits all. It's not a magic cure. And most importantly, if you are on pharmaceuticals, you can't take yourself off those pharmaceuticals in lieu of cannabis or CBD, especially without involving your physician. And so these medical programs require physicians to be involved, which is critical not only for ensuring that individuals living with epilepsy don't have a breakthrough seizure or have further complications, but it's also important because then the physician continues to monitor progress, continues to monitor current pharmaceuticals and adjust their doses, and they can also help consult on things. And so these programs are important for keeping physicians involved instead of just self-medicating, which is very important for something like epilepsy that you don't do.
Okay. Thank you all for your response to that question. I have another question from the audience here, which I'm actually going to piggyback on a little bit. So kind of a two-part question from the audience. The question is, how do we start the conversation with our children around cannabis so that they do not feel ashamed or bad from their peers when they are a cannabis kid? So what they mean is when they're, cannabis patient as a child. And I would like to extend that question. How do we talk to children in general about medical cannabis? selfishly, I have a couple nieces who are now in middle school, and my brother and I have kind of been debating this issue over the last several months or year.
As a mother of older kids, my girls will be 27 this year. I do have a stepdaughter who is 11, and I think it's all about the approach. I think being forthright and being honest and coin it to a degree of their maturity. I mean, you don't want to go outright and give that person a conversation for 18 or 20-year-old, but if she's 11 and she's experiencing epilepsy, there has to be a way to cater that conversation to her maturity. So I think it's all about the approach, and I think it's about being honest and giving the kid as much information as possible, and giving that kid confidence so that they know that, it's not bad that I'm using cannabis, that I'm not a pothead, and all of these negative connotations around this term, and make sure that they're proud of what they're doing, because it's saving their lives. It's giving them a better quality of life. So at the end of the day, if the approach is good for their maturity level, and we build their confidence and we give them the education and the information to make sure that they can articulate what they're doing in a great way that makes them feel good about their condition, I think it will go over much better.
I've actually given some talks at high schools in the LA Unified School District. A very popular high school speaker. I think because I'm honest with the kids, and I think at high school age, I have 6 nephews and nieces. So I'm always asked to give these talks about drugs in general with teenagers, and I think teenagers know a lot of what's going on in the world because of the World Wide Web these days. So I think age-appropriate conversations are so important. I don't know how many kids thought it was a really great idea to drop. They were like really into this notion, at least the last talk I gave before the pandemic. They were talking about LSD, like, oh, we want to do this. And are you sure? Let me tell you what happened when I did it, and letting them know, the same about cannabis. If you smoke it, it can get you really high. You can get paranoid. This, and that can happen. I have a 21-year-old niece who decided to smoke weed. And when she felt that way, she actually called me because I had talked to her about that, and with kids, if you talk to them and you're honest about these things, I think they'll be like more comfortable reaching out to you should something bad happen. So now I know if my niece decides to take magic mushrooms or something, and has a bad reaction, she'll call me, which is important to keep that line of communication open, especially with taboo things like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? So that's just my auntie advice.
Okay. Kind of question here that dovetails with the last question then. How can state cannabis regulators collaborate more productively with local education agencies with the goal of improving student access and use on K-12 student school campuses? As we all know, a lot of students need access to their medications, and it entail them bringing them, onto the campuses.
I can start with this one from the policy background, and also an issue that I hear about very frequently is the use of cannabis and CBD at school. And I will say that unfortunately, the education gap, there is an education gap and a problem, but it is not the problem. The problem is the federal Drug-Free School Zone Act. And the fact that cannabis is still Schedule I on the federal schedule. So the reason that schools mostly won't allow cannabis or CBD is that law, and it puts their funding in trouble or in jeopardy. So until we address the Schedule I designation of cannabis, this is a federal barrier and not a state barrier. And the states can give schools permission, and some schools some states have passed laws giving schools permission, and some schools do allow it, but by and large, many of them point to the Drug-Free School Zone Act and the fact that their funding could be in jeopardy. And really, by addressing the Schedule I status on the federal side, does a lot for research as well, because that's another barrier to cannabis research. And, you know, just briefly, Schedule 1, it's that because it's a high propensity for abuse and absolutely no medical value, which even the federal government now has officially acknowledged that there is medical value in cannabis when the FDA approved Epidiolex in 2018. So our own federal government says that there is medical value in cannabis or CBD, and yet it's still Schedule 1. So really, with the Schedule 1 status, if we can get that fixed, that has a big trickle-down effect, like an actual trickle-down with education, with research, with the medical cannabis laws in the state. It allows states to work together. It allows patients to travel with their cannabis and CBD. But, you know, really the problem with schools does come down to that federal law a lot of times.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up. So unfortunately, I think Abby's gonna be the only one to answer that question, but this has been, you know, really informative. I really appreciate all three of you joining me on this panel today. I hope the audience, you know, got something out of this today. And without further ado, then I will just say goodbye, and everybody enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all again.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day. Bye.